Good afternoon, everyone. So me and Frank are going to talk jointly about the Staffordshire Hoard project that we're working on to create replicas for the Hoard. I'm going to introduce the Hoard and say why it's so exciting and why it's so important and why we're making replicas. And then Frank will follow up with all the things you're most interested about, that technical information. So the Hoard is jointly owned by two museums, or two councils, so Stoke and Birmingham. I work for Birmingham Museums Trust, and this is the museum that I work in. And obviously the other one is the jewellery school that Frank works in, and he can talk about more of that as he comes on. If you had time after the conference, do go into the Birmingham City Centre and see the Hoard. It is a free display. It was found in 2009 by a metal detector, and as you said, not far from here, probably only an hour away from Birmingham. That's the metal detector there in the top right, wearing an outfit with as many pockets as he could possibly have on him, and this is what he found. So he found 53 of these little bags, of which were at the time known to be gold and silver. At the time, there was a very big response to the Hoard, so people lined up around the museum, both in Birmingham and in Stoke, for about 5 hours to have the first look at the Hoard. And this is it down at the British Museum for its valuation. So it went down to the British Museum, it was valued by the Treasure Committee, and then acquired by the two councils. I'm a conservator, so it's my job to make sure that the Hoard, all sort of 4,000 pieces of it, is carefully cleaned and researched. We have cleaned the Hoard with just normal garden thorns, which is something new and different to the process, but does mean that the Hoard wasn't damaged in any way, so no scratches were added to it, and at the end of this presentation I'll show you why that's so very important. But this is what the Hoard looks like on one table. If you put it all together without the boxes, it comes to about a shopping bag size. So it's not a huge volume of material, but it is Anglo-Saxon. It's 7th century, so it's 1,400 years old, and it's a collection of what we think so far of military material, most of it coming from swords. A lot of it, as I'll show you in a second, we actually don't really know what it is yet, and that's simply because there's no known parallel of this material, apart from maybe Sutton Hoo, which is the burial of a king. This sort of elite Anglo-Saxon warrior material just isn't found normally. So as I said, most of it's coming from swords. They are quite spectacular swords. This is the Sutton Hoo version on the left-hand side, so you can see how it all sort of comes together. What's really important about the Hoard, and one of the things that we need the replicas for as well, is that it wasn't put into the ground as whole objects. So when it went in the ground in the 7th century, they decided to rip everything apart. So the swords currently are sort of a big jumble of pommel caps, so the very top bit, and collars and hilts. And what we're doing is kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle of putting it all together, but also we can sort of unwrap the details, and things that are very damaged we can sort of make new again. We do have some religious objects. We have the folded cross here on the left-hand side. It's one of the more significant pieces in the Hoard. It's sort of, when it was new, it's about this size. And the two ideas are it's either the cover from a manuscript, like a Bible, or it's possibly from the staff that you carry into battle with you. And importantly, we also have this inscribed strip with a Latin inscription on, and that's very early. So had this been found by itself, it would have an 8th century date. So bringing things 100 years earlier also starts to help us understand our own heritage, really, how the Anglo-Saxons were bringing things in from Europe. We have lots of unknown things. We have, at the top left there, we have a thing that looks like an eye, and we have a pair of them, so it looks like a pair of eyes. And this is one of the objects that Frank will look at in his presentation. We have these sort of ear-type objects, and then we have lots of these sort of animal objects, which went on to something, we just don't know what yet. One of our big jobs, again, is finding these links between objects. So this is what we call the mystery object, because it's essentially, it's a mystery so far. It is unique. No one's ever seen anything like this ever before. It's made from both recycled and new materials. So the little dome at the top, that coloured piece is recycled Roman glass, and everything else is sort of Anglo-Saxon manufactured, made in England. But through this is its finished piece. And then there are sort of clues possibly of what this was. This is the prophet Ezra from an 8th century manuscript. And if you look on his head, it looks like he's wearing something a bit like the mystery object. And we don't know what that is, but it's quite tantalising to think that maybe it was sort of a headgear of a high priest. We do a lot of rejoining. So this, again, is an object that we have no idea what it is. It looks a bit like the body of a fish, but doesn't have any head. It could be from something like a shield. So again, something military in nature. But it's a long process to go from cleaning these objects to having them in display in the gallery, and then possibly we can keep going and recreate them and make them new again through a replica process. This is another important object that we've found recently. So this object is made from every single bit of material that we find in the hoard. So it's glass and garnet and gold and silver and yellow, and it's an amazing thing. The research team thinks this is probably, again, a kingly item, so a great king would have carried this with him. And it is just, these sort of tantalising looks into the past. Most of the objects, sort of 60% of the collection, is filigree, and it's sort of a range of filigree designs. Of all the objects of the hoard, no two designs are similar. So that's really important, again, for telling the story of the Anglo-Saxons. So these objects were very special and very unique to a single warrior. But also what's amazing about them is how they're made. So when you have a close-up look of the filigree, you can see actually where everything looks like it's intertwined wires. It actually isn't. So they have individually cut and then soldered on to back plates, these little designs. This one, you can see the very right-hand side, is 0.36 of a millimetre across. But we have ones that are down to 0.26, just these tiny, tiny, tiny wires that are almost invisible to the naked eye. So they're quite amazing construction, and actually are telling us a lot about technology, how they made things. And at the moment, we're not even sure how they did the soldering process. That's one of the things we're going to look at through the research project. So there are sort of, amazing sort of glimpses to technology. And then we have things that are cloisonné objects. So things that are set into a cell, into a cloison cell. Again, one at the top is a pommel cap. But things like this at the bottom left, we have no idea what they are. They form a sort of together, there's sort of 6 of them, they form sort of a racing car track type of thing. But it is quite interesting to see these completely new types of objects coming through. But the construction of the cloisonné, again, is amazing. It's set into a cell, but underneath it is a gold foil. So you can see the construction here on the right-hand side. You'll see the gold foil, and underneath it is a thing which is a paste that we generically call a paste. But it's probably beeswax, and it has a double function. It's there to make your garnets nice and flat, so everything looks amazing. But it's also there to hold in the foil into the cell. They have added a little bit of glue as well to make sure that everything sticks into place and is perfect. But this cell work, again, is also quite technical. The cell walls are made from single lengths of gold sheet that, again, are soldered onto the back plates through a technology we're yet to understand completely. But the foil behind gives it the sparkle. So garnets themselves don't naturally sparkle. They're very flat. So what's happening is it's going through, catching the light and bouncing back out again, like a bicycle reflector does. And then the garnets are quite interesting as well because they're naturally very hard. But one of the reasons could be that they're choosing a material that is functional. So if you want to take your sword into battle, you wouldn't want to use a naturally very soft stone, because if you had to hit someone with it and give them a good pommeling, as the saying goes, then it wouldn't be that functional. Your stones would just fall out. So both sort of beauty, power aspects have been built into these objects. These are some of the close-ups of the garnets and the foils. You can see that very intricate pattern of the foils You can get sort of 4 little grids to a millimetre on some of them. So again, extraordinary high detail, very sophisticated at able to make these objects. The key is making a die, so you'd make a bronze die most likely, and then press your gold multiple times. But again, we only have one known die from all of Europe. So comparing and looking at technology and how they're making things is again something that we're trying to do. And the garnets themselves, you can see that they're all completely flat-edged, perfectly fit. Later on, something changed, and actually the garnets weren't as made very well. They all had these nipped edges. So for a time period in the 7th century, this technique and these Anglo-Saxons were making the best jewellery/weaponry designs of anywhere in Europe. You couldn't find anything finer. We looked for lots of things of evidence of manufacture. Obviously the objects, because they're all ripped up, it's really great to be able to see how they were marking out the details. And again, this is something Frank can also talk about. But on the left-hand side there, we have the mystery objects. But you can see that cross line as they're matching up sort of separate panels to fit into these designs. But then we have some other interesting ones. So on the right-hand side there, it's quite difficult to see. But on the left, in the middle, there's something a bit like a tic-tac-toe board. So again, could this be a maker's mark? Could this be just something they put on there and thought, no one's ever going to see it, it'll be fine, and then left it there? But again, sort of bringing these stories back about the manufacture and how it was used and its destruction is all part of the process that we're doing. And the bottom one, again, you can see some laying out marks of how they're putting their sword handles together. There's a few more, a bit more obvious ones. We have these crosses on the backs of some of the objects. They have no manufacturing function that we know of. Some people think they could be maker's marks, but they're quite sort of generic to have little crosses everywhere. So again, we need to look at patterns for these objects. And again, finishing marks. The one at the bottom there, you can see this sort of bird over the top, quite roughly, so that it fitted into whatever object it went into. And again, that can kind of tell us what sort of thing it was fitting into, maybe something more solid that couldn't take a rough surface, so something that didn't have any give into it, maybe sort of a wood more than a leather, something like that. We do have some evidence of repair in the hoard, but only 2, considering these were functional weapons. You'd think you'd see more, but if they're replacing like for like, it would be very hard to tell. But this one, this is the end of a pommel cap again from a sword. They've replaced the garnets with red glass, which again tells us stories about, why didn't they use garnets? Could they not afford it? Didn't they have the technology? They didn't know how. Again, sort of interesting stories that we can start to tell. And on the ring there, so they've used amber instead of garnet. So it would look okay in the day, but now it looks kind of, decayed and brown and a bit knobbly. So again, telling stories about the hoard. We have a new gallery, and this is how we've got involved with the Jewellery Innovation Centre. The gallery is new. It's the first permanent gallery at Birmingham. It has some replicas and mostly real objects. And the key for us is being able to tell that story about these objects, why they're off-site, so why they're at our partner museum, our joint owners museum, if they go out and tour. So having the objects there is invaluable to help us tell that story and show how important the Anglo-Saxons were to the 7th century and to the story of what became England. We have quite a lot of outputs for the replicas. So not only do we get one for the gallery that fulfills those needs of having to show people what the objects were, we can make them larger. So this is a school group, this is the Young Archaeologist Club. So they're learning about the objects. They can have a look at the filigree close up, so we don't have microscopes to see that very close up detail, to be able to see it without microscope. And they can learn about sort of the documentation process of the object as well. So a nice sort of learning feedback. In terms of the gallery, obviously we can have a handling replica, and we do. So for one of the objects, the pectoral cross, we now have one up in the gallery, and people can touch and feel it and hold it. And that sort of tactile experience is really important for the visitor. Again, it makes them sort of feel more in tune with the hoard. The replica itself is the same weight and the same size as the original, so they really do get the feeling that it's the real object. And we've had extraordinarily positive feedback about that. We also have conservation cleaning days where, again, in the future we could look at to use replicas, so people are cleaning and revealing the hoard for us and being part of that story. People are very keen to always learn more and know more, and especially local people from the Midlands are really interactive with the hoards. That's been very important. And this is the replica, the handling replica at the bottom there, and the large one that they hand out. We are still making more objects. We have the Treasury Appeal, which is currently ongoing. So currently we're making 3 objects. We're fundraising for about 10 more. So if you have any desire to sponsor a replica, let me know. They're very amazing, as Frank is going to just show you. But the main work is still ongoing. We still need £100,000 to finish the main body of research, but we're quite confident that we'll get there. But the research will be completed in 2017, along with hopefully some of the replicas. And what we'll do then is publish all our work so it's free to everyone on our website, both the finished product and all the data that we've accrued. And hopefully we'll go to publication in 2018. But let me hand you over to Frank, who's going to talk to you more about the technical side of things.
Right, thank you, Pieta. Before I talk about the replica process and how we've applied digital technologies to that, I'd like to remind you of 2 figures that Pieta used. 1,400 years ago, 7th century. Okay, I'm going to show you some pretty amazing stuff that we, with our 21st century digital technologies, have really, really struggled to reproduce. So I'm going to go through the replica process that we've been involved in with the museum. We first got involved with something called the Papal Cross Project. Pieta showed you this folded cross earlier. And in 2010, we were approached by Birmingham City Council, who said, the Pope's visiting in 3 months' time, and the museum have got this lovely Christian cross. Do you think you could unfold it, make a copy, so we can bung it to the Pope when he comes to visit? So we got absolutely unrivaled access. One of the great things for us as people who make jewellery is to go into Pieta's workshop and be handed these pieces of 1,400-year-old jewellery. So we got to actually handle this piece, and we used some fairly high-tech pieces of string to actually measure the lengths of the folded cross, because traditional methods where we just ping it with a laser scanner would not work. Another favourite piece of high-tech kit you'll see around is Blue Tack. Really, really good piece of high-tech kit. So after this unrivaled access, my team of CAD experts were able to draw up a CAD program that gave us all of the details of the different sections and different parts of this cross. You can see here the really intricate detail of the fine work. And we had to figure out how we were going to reproduce this in the cross. And so we explored a couple of technologies. The blue stuff you can see is printed on a solid-scape printer. The orangey yellow stuff is printed on an EnvisionTech printer. So as a centre, we've got access to various technologies that we take advantage of. We eventually came down to using the solid-scape prints that we could cast directly into silver. We actually, although it's a gold cross, we actually made it in silver and then gold-plated it, because Birmingham City Council couldn't afford a gold one. We also had to work very hard to recreate the settings into which the very large garnets would be set. Again, we used a solid-scape printer to print into wax that we cast directly. But also, if you see the white objects there, they're actually printed on an object printer. And we used them as master patterns around which we made a mould into which we poured an epoxy resin that looked like garnet. So this big round central garnet in the cross that you'll see in a moment isn't actually a real garnet. It's a resin reproduction. The smaller garnets that you'll see around, which I think is in the next one, so the 4 smaller ones are real garnets. The one in the centre is a resin reproduction. And that's the actual cross and its finished state. So during every stage of its manufacture, it was all done in the Birmingham Jewellery Quarter by Birmingham Jewellery Quarter craftspeople. Even the presentation box was made in Birmingham in the Jewellery Quarter. And this is what was eventually presented to the Holy See on his visit to Birmingham. So let's have a look at the cross-on AI. It's quite obvious from this picture why it's called an eye, but there are a number of intriguing facts about it that we've had to deal with as we try to make the reproduction. So we start off by laser scanning the objects. It's a Europack arm, Europacker in the auditorium outside. So my guys scan it, capture that CAD data, and then use it to create a master pattern. The scan data is always less than perfect. They always have to do a lot of manual intervention on the CAD program. That eventually gave us a file that we could print. And again, just like the Papal Cross, we experimented with a number of different ways of printing these objects. So we use a solid-scape printer, an EnvisionTech printer, and a ProJet. So here's some output from the EnvisionTech, from which we make a master mold in jet wax and cast from it. This is an interesting one. This is a handling exhibit that Pieta was talking about, where people can actually be handed it and allowed to touch it. It's been printed on a bog standard nylon printer. And then we settled for at times using the solid-scape printer because we could capture that fine, intricate detail. But we also gave an extensive test to our new ProJet printer. And here you can see a set of builds as they came off the ProJet. But then one of the things that people tend to miss is you can't take them straight off the machine and use them. You have to post-process them. So we post-process them in something that gets commonly called the deep fat fryer. Effectively, it's an ultrasonic tank that's heated, which allows us to dissolve away the white support material. So you can see here the support material starting to be dissolved away. And here's the objects then ready to go to the casting department. This is part now, we've now gone away from digital printing, 3D printing, into traditional jewellery manufacturing techniques. So we've taken those waxes, and these are in fact a couple of solid-scape waxes. We've mounted them on a tree, which is a traditional jewellery manufacturing process, put them into what we call a can. Into that can we pour investment material. For those of you who don't know the lost wax process, investment material is high strength, high temperature plaster of Paris. So that encases the wax entirely. We allow that wax to solidify and set, and then we place it in a furnace upside down so that the wax burns and melts away out of the can. We then take the can to the furnace where we've created molten metal in a crucible, which we pour into the can, which once we've broken them out of the can, gives us the cast bronze reproductions. So here you can see the two bronze reproductions that came out of the can, separated off the support tree and ready to be worked on then by our specialists, who are going to turn it from this rough casting into something that looks exactly like the piece in the museum. You've seen this picture before. One of the challenges still remains, how to make those foils that go behind the garnets. I don't think Pieta covered it, but those foils actually have a function in that they add bling. They reflect multiple rays of light back through the garnet. A garnet itself, even though it's highly polished, is quite a flat, unresponsive stone. So they've added these foils to reflect light back through the garnet to give it sparkle in sunlight. Now again, remember, 1,400 years ago, no electricity, no magnification, no steel tools. So we started to set about making these foils. So we started trying to make them manually. This is milliput, and Samantha, who works in our finishing department, tried to reproduce the crisscross pattern. Some of these patterns, she actually plucked her own hairs and pressed them into the milliput to try and get something as fine and as equal as they were doing. And as Pieta said, we read the literature and we found that the suspicion was they were using a bronze dye. So we moved away from this one fairly quickly, and we started exploring ways of how to make a bronze dye. We did an EnvisionTech build, but you can see at the top there, we had a bit of a failure in the build process where it was just too fine for the machine to actually reproduce. But we managed to reproduce it on the SolidScape. Again, we lost a little bit of detail that you'll see at the top, but we were able to take this directly to the casting department and cast it in bronze. And here you can see us using that bronze mould with small foils, and the process is very simple. We put the two things together and whack it with a big hammer. But that gives us something that's fairly close to those foils that are under the garnets. And here you can see Samantha now starting to work on actually cutting those foils up to fit into those tiny little cells. And this is another point where we as jewellery people say, how did they do that? Anglo-Saxons, what we call the Dark Ages, not long after the Romans went home, and they're doing amazing stuff like this. There was nothing dark about this age at all. You can see on the right there, Samantha using a pair of small, very sharp, high tool steel, stainless steel nail scissors to actually clip these things out. This is looking at one under magnification. And again, you'll spot the high-tech blue tack and the milliput. The milliput is to replace what Pieta described as resin, or tree resin, that lifted the foil and the garnet. The blue tack was an indicator to us these cells are actually empty and don't put anything in there. So here's Samantha using simple super glue to place the cut foil into place. Once it's been placed, very carefully, she then has to hold it in place till the glue's set and gone off. Hugely time consuming. We're talking about somebody who really knows what she's doing. Samantha is a really good expert jeweler. And this is 30 or 40 hours of work, just cutting up and putting in all of these little foils. Again, how did they do it? Here you can see some of the detail now of the foils being worked in. It's a slightly closer image. And actually, if you look closely at that, you'll see that our foils are not as fine and delicate as the Anglo-Saxon ones you saw earlier. And again, milliput used to actually raise them up so that when we place the imitation garnets into those cells, they'll be at the right height. And here you can see 3. So bottom right is the original. Top right is our reproduction, where the next stage is to insert the garnets. So the one on the left is one that we made where we used our skills to extrapolate what this eye probably looked like before it was damaged and went into the ground. So this is something, again, the museum people are really keen on. We can give them back what these objects probably looked like before they became damaged. You'll also see some early experimentation with different resins to reproduce the garnets. We've actually moved away from that now, and what we've done is we've taken the CAD file for the eye. We've turned it into a negative. We've printed the negative, around which we've made a mould, and into that mould we're pouring the resins, and we're creating individual garnets out of resin to put into the cells. And we have actually got this eye on display at the far side of the hall, and you can see the first few garnets, imitation garnets, that we've inserted into it. This is another project that we worked on with the museum, the pectoral cross. You'll notice first off, it's broken. The other amazing thing for us is it's hollow. So again, my guys went in there. The museum gives us free and open access, and we laser scanned the object, imported it into a piece of CAD software, and my guys started to work on that file. So we can do some really fine work. Pieta explained earlier how these crisscross twisted wire-like effects look under magnification. And again, even with our A1 very good CAD softwares and really good printers, we struggled. It's almost exactly the same, but not quite. And you can see a rendered image there of an undamaged cross. So again, we used various techniques and various technologies to actually print and reproduce these parts. So here's the pectoral cross in its various bits, and this is it after it's been cleaned out. Again, you notice the garnish at the bottom. This again is to be used as a master pattern around which a mould will be made and a resin poured in to reproduce the garnish. So here you see the real pectoral cross and our copy. And our copy is actually on display again at the far side of the hall. Can you tell the difference? That's ours on the right, I think. But then, again, because we have all this data, we've been commissioned to make a copy of the cross in its undamaged state. So this is for a secret project that I can't discuss too much. But this is a 9-carat gold cross with a garnet, with a real garnet that we got cut specially by a stone cutting expert. And this will be adorning somebody's neck in the very near future, or is it actually more likely his chest? And it just remains for me to say thank you for your time and attention. You see up here on the screen a list of all our supporters, or the museum supporters. Thank you for your time.